This program contains graphic violence and sexual situations. Viewer discretion is advised. In 1990, a quiet university town is terrorized by an unknown madman. Over a blood-spattered 4-day period, he rapes, murders, and mutilates 5 attractive young co-eds.
It created in the community a sense that no one was safe.
His atrocities are savage and intended to shock authorities.
He would cut off body parts, pose them, decapitate them.
One victim was stabbed 31 times.
But as secret audio recordings made by the killer reveal, his motives are even darker and more sadistic.
There's a tremendous amount of nihilism in his voice.
He enjoyed these crimes. It was empowering to him.
The case involves mass panic at a major university.
There's a maniac on the loose, and no one knows who he is or when he'll strike again.
A flurry of false accusations.
I became the target of lead detectives in the case after their murders.
And crime scene photos so ghastly, police will intentionally destroy them.
I had nightmares for ages after these photographs.
Meet Danny Rolling, AKA the Gainesville Ripper. Just a drifter who wandered into town until murder made him famous. The savage murders of 5 college students in 1990 struck fear throughout the town of Gainesville, Florida, and horrified the entire nation.
You can be sure that this university and this community is doing everything possible to apprehend the perpetrator and to ensure the safety of our community.
A deep paranoia fell over the town as media outlets reported on the terrifying murder spree.
Everyone from news stations to Phil Donahue descended on little old Gainesville to cover this case.
All the news agencies were certainly trying to get one-upsmanship on everybody else for information, and of course that led to stories that pointed in all sorts of directions, and none of which pointed towards what was true.
The crimes were so vicious, the media compared the murderer to infamous serial killer Jack the Ripper, and dubbed the assailant the Gainesville Ripper. His horrific crimes have been chronicled in various media, and even inspired the blockbuster horror film Scream. While many try to forget that terrifying August week in 1990, questions still remain about what led one man to commit acts of such pure evil. In 1990, Gainesville is known as a peaceful college town, home to the University of Florida and Santa Fe Community College.
College towns are these wonderful little havens where everybody feels safe all the time.
Gainesville offers everything a student could want: pleasant weather, a renowned sports program, and plenty of activities.
Those days, it was such an innocent community. The people didn't lock their doors here.
It was a wonderful place to go to school, and Money Magazine had even ranked Gainesville as the 13th best place to live.
As the summer winds down, students begin getting ready for the fall semester.
Between the summer and fall semester, kids moved into town, and as you can imagine, it was a party week.
Schools starting that sororities and fraternities are due in rush. The football team's starting to get together.
We had a new president of the university, John Lombardi, and it was kind of going to be this exciting start.
So there would have been much excitement and hubbub on campus.
However, it's not just students who have traveled to Gainesville. Someone else has decided to call this town home. In the midst of the pre-semester moving and partying, no one pays much attention to him, but he quietly watches and waits. He has already found 2 potential victims, 18-year-old Sonia Larson and 17-year-old Christina Powell. The girls are roommates, just starting their freshman year.
Their parents wanted them to live on campus, but they couldn't get a permanent room. So instead, they moved into a nearby apartment called Williamsburg Village.
It's fine.
With the school year starting, the wait list for getting new phone lines activated is long. Both girls use payphones or other means to call home.
Yes, we're fine. We're putting the phone line in next week.
Keep in mind that this was 1990. There's no texting, and cell phones are really rare. So you had to wait for your landline to be installed, and until it was, you were pretty isolated.
Okay. I gotta go. Christina's waiting on me. Okay, I love you too. Bye.
Come on, let's go.
As darkness falls across Gainesville, the shadowy figure who has been stalking the young co-eds prepares to attack. The killer pulls out his slot-head screwdriver and tries the doorknob. To his surprise, it's unlocked. Inside, he finds Christina Powell asleep on the couch. Upstairs, Sonia Larson is asleep in her bed. Sonia wakes just as the figure slaps a piece of duct tape across her mouth. He plunges a knife repeatedly into her body until she stops moving. He moves downstairs and approaches the sleeping Christina Powell. Unlike Sonia, the man has other plans for Christina.
He viciously rapes Christina, and then he turns her over and stabs her in the back several times.
Neighbors later report hearing thuds and loud music coming from the girl's apartment.
Sadly, Sonia and Christina's neighbors said that he heard loud music and banging, but he just thought maybe they were hanging up pictures in their new place. As the sun came up, it got really hot. Remember, this is Florida in August, and a lot of people smelled something rancid coming out of Sonia and Christina's apartment, but nobody investigated.
As other residents of the complex continue to party and move in, apartment 113 stays eerily dark and quiet.
None of the other residents of this apartment knew that two girls had been brutally murdered next door, and their bodies were still there.
According to Mary Ryzook's book, The Gainesville Ripper, friends leave notes on Sonia and Christina's front door, asking where they are. Meanwhile, the killer is searching for his next victim. Within hours of the first murders, he targets 18-year-old Krista Hoyt.
Krista Hoyt was the only one who didn't attend the University of Florida. She was a student at Santa Fe Community College.
Krista was called Glowworm because she had such a vibrant personality. She worked in the records department of the local sheriff's office.
He had clearly been into the duplexes where Krista Hoyt had lived. He had been there, he had clearly scoped that out and had decided he was going to go back there and attack her, and he did.
Which is another part of the serial killer's thrill, the stalking aspect, because it's before the crime has actually happened, before the rape or murder has taken place. They're enjoying the thrill of the hunt.
When Krista Hoyt got home, the killer was waiting for her. He had moved a bookshelf that was near the door and created a hiding place for himself.
Krista is ambushed in her own duplex and savagely dragged into her bedroom.
It was now Sunday, and no one had seen or heard from Sonia Larson or Christina Powell since Thursday afternoon.
After their phone calls and door knocks are unanswered, Christina Powell's parents contact a maintenance worker, who in turn calls the police. Gainesville officer Ray Barber investigates, and what he discovers is so shocking that he can't reveal the full truth to the Powells.
We're working on making identification. As soon as I know something, I promise you I'm gonna let you know. I know this is difficult. Hang in there for me. Wait right here, okay?
Oh, God.
Dispatch 11 Mary 7.
Go ahead, 11 Mary 7.
Yeah, I'm at the Williamsburg Village Apartments. I've got an apparent double homicide, requesting backup units and detectives.
Copy that. Backup is en route.
Better get a crisis team here, too. I've got parents on the scene.
Copy that.
10-4 dispatch.
First responders and forensics teams are ill-prepared for what they find inside.
Both girls had been brutally stabbed, and Christina had been raped and her breast had been mutilated.
He had an unusual habit of needing to remove the girl's nipples.
But the killer took the atrocities even one step further.
In the case of several of the victims, female victims, they were mutilated and bodies were displayed.
Police find Sonia Larson's dead body provocatively posed on the bed with her legs parted.
While he's posing that body, he's kind of future framing how somebody's going to react to this, and he's going to get a smile on his face while he's posing that body, knowing he's going to get that effect from someone else.
Christina Powell's bloody and mutilated body has also been sexually posed. There is evidence that the killer had tried to cover his DNA tracks.
The killer manipulated the crime scene. What he attempted to do is clean up the crime scene, eliminate evidence.
Investigators found a bottle of dish detergent by Christina's open legs. The killer had used it in an attempt to destroy any DNA evidence that he may have left in her private area.
As police investigate the gruesome murders, word spreads quickly throughout Gainesville.
Of course, because this was Florida, in everyone's mind was, is this another Ted Bundy?
Ted Bundy is the infamous serial killer who murdered 30 women from 1974 to 1978. He was executed in 1989.
They hadn't forgotten what Bundy had done, and it spread through campus like wildfire when the first two victims' bodies were found.
Like Ted Bundy, the killer behind the Gainesville slayings stalks college students as his prey. Police have no clue who's behind the crimes. But in reality, the murderer is a drifter by the name of Danny Rolling.
Danny Harold Rolling was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, to a father that was a police officer, but was also a horrible, violent, abusive man. He terrorized Danny and his mother pretty much without equal.
Shut up! Shut up! You were a mistake. Your mother never should have had you.
James Rolling's abuse of his children is nonstop, including handcuffing and beating Danny and his younger brother.
He made it apparent to Danny throughout his whole childhood that he never wanted him, he demeaned him, humiliated him, and physically abused him.
As Danny grows up, he shows signs of troubling behavior.
He was certainly a sociopath with all sorts of disorders. You name them, he could fill a book on the disorders that Danny suffered from.
Danny did drugs, drank, was a peeping Tom. Danny used any and every means at his disposal to escape from both his home life as well as reality.
In the mid-70s, Rolling marries and sires a daughter. Around 1977, his wife divorces him and takes their little girl. According to Rolling's mother, after that, he, quote, just lost it.
Danny couldn't hold down a job for long. So what he did was he progressed to robbing people and businesses. These are signs of more extreme and worse actions which are to come.
Those future actions now include murder, rape, and mutilation. From his hideout in the woods, Danny Rolling keeps an audio journal in which he addresses his parents directly.
I'm not sure. Sometimes it seems like it's the other me. Mom tried to give me some help. Of course you'd say no, Pop, but I didn't need it. I wanted to make you proud of me. I let you down. I'm sorry for that. Well, I'm gonna sign off. I've got something I've got to do.
Our understanding is what he left to go do was kill Sonia and her roommate.
Hours after Sonia Larson and Christina Powell's bodies are discovered, Krista Hoyt fails to show up for her midnight shift at the Alachua Sheriff's Department.
I left her 2 messages as well. It's just not like her to not show up or call.
She was supposed to report in for work, and she had a reputation in the community as being an unbelievably hard worker and very committed to her job and very much wanting to join a police department.
Alachua County deputies Gail Barber and Keith O'Hara are dispatched to do a welfare check on Krista at her duplex.
Tell you what, let's go around back. We'll see what we can find out.
What the deputies find horrifies them.
Oh my God.
What?
Her head is gone.
What?
Her head is gone.
She is fully decapitated with her head severed completely from her body and moved and placed on a shelf. And then Danny provocatively and grotesquely posed her body, the torso and legs, on the bed, essentially on display.
Not only did he put the head on the shelf, but he placed a mirror next to it so it would be the first thing police would see when they walked in the room.
As police investigate further, they find that Krista had been raped and her breasts mutilated like the previous victims. However, Krista had a single deep incision running from her pelvic area up to her collarbone.
I personally think that part of Danny Rawlins' motive was really meant to shock police. And his father was a Shreveport Police Department lieutenant for 20 years.
So now you have a third girl brutally murdered in just one weekend.
That sent everybody into absolute terror because Christina Hoyt worked for the Sheriff's Department. So I think it created in the community a sense that no one was safe.
The entire town of Gainesville is in a panic, but there is one segment of the population who should be especially alarmed.
Sonia Larson, Christina Powell, and Krista Hoyt all have one thing in common.
Danny Rolling, much like Ted Bundy, had a very specific victim type.
When you look at all of his victims, they all had brown hair and brown eyes. That's most likely who he was sexually interested in.
I had a daughter who was right then a teenager, a small brunette teenager at the time, and so just like everybody else, I was scared to death.
And to add to the hysteria, nobody had a clue who did it.
Danny was able to get away with what he did because he was incredibly adept at least outwardly conforming to our norms and standards. He knew how to behave in a store. He knew how to observe and watch people without being caught.
Rolling blends in and becomes almost invisible as he hunts his prey.
You have this meaningless guy. You'd never notice him in a crowd. That's the frightening thing about these guys. When people say, but he lived here, and I never noticed that about him.
With young girls being the killer's target, many of the co-eds thought there was safety in numbers.
Mom.
Many students gather for sleepovers in an attempt to stay safe until after the killer is caught.
We'll call you tomorrow, I promise. I think we're safer here all together tonight.
I love you. Bye.
The Gainesville Ripper is on the prowl. In August of 1990, the town of Gainesville, Florida is gripped in fear as 3 female college students are found viciously murdered and mutilated.
With 3 young women killed between Friday and Sunday, police aren't using the word serial killer quite yet. But action is being taken.
Media coverage erupts as news of the grisly murders spreads. A task force consisting of local law enforcement and behavioral specialists from the FBI is set up to hunt for the elusive killer.
Tips were coming in from all over, but most of them were dead ends. And the CSI units were at the scenes, leaving no stone unturned.
The task force has no idea the murderer is a drifter named Danny Rolling, who's already looking for his next victim. As law enforcement begins its scramble to unmask Rolling, students are still living in fear, wondering where he will strike next.
It's just getting too frightening to live alone, or, even with friends, it's too scary.
Everybody moved kind of in groups, and especially for the women, it was, well, I have a boyfriend, so I'm gonna be safe, so I'll just go stay with my boyfriend.
23-year-old Tracy Paulus already has a strong male to protect her. 23-year-old Manny Taboda. Roommates at the University of Florida, Tracy and Manny have been best friends since high school in Miami.
She was a pretty former homecoming queen in high school who everyone knew, and he was a 6'2", 200-pound former football player.
Tracy's parents were thrilled because Manny had been a wonderful friend and was this great big guy that could keep Tracy safe.
By now, the Gainesville murders are national news. Tracy is on the phone with her mom, trying to reassure her that she's safe as she waits on Manny to get home from his bartending shift.
Mom, it's Manny. Who in their right mind is gonna come in an apartment with a 200-pound 6'2" brick wall in here? I mean, seriously. I know. I promise I'll stay close to him. Besides, he sleeps with his door open so his cat can get into his room. He can hear anything.
Tracy, it's me. I'm home.
That's him. Okay. I love you too. Good night.
Hi.
Thank God you're home. It's all over the news.
You've watched enough news, all right? They're just repeating the same thing over and over. They'll get whoever this is.
They don't know who it is.
They'll find out. Look, I'm home. It'll be okay.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I'm beat. I'm going to bed now that you're home.
All right, get some rest. Oh, no more TV.
Sometimes Danny Rolling would stalk his victims, and other times he wouldn't. And in her book, author Mary Ryzik recounts how residents of the Gatorwood Apartments reported seeing someone prowling through their neighborhood on the night of the murders.
Rolling is able to break into Manny and Tracy's apartment by prying open the sliding glass door. Rolling enters Manny's room first and pauses when he sees the size of the former athlete.
But I think Danny Rollins was also big and strong at that time.
A struggle breaks out between Rolling and Manny.
Danny later said that he was a bit concerned during the fight because Manny landed a few hard hits that almost knocked him out.
Rolling eventually overpowers Manny. Losing massive amounts of blood, Manny eventually succumbs to the killer, who then turns to his true target.
Manny was stabbed 31 times all over his body.
You're the one, aren't you?
Yeah, I know one.
Tracy and Manny's neighbors hear Tracy scream from next door. They check outside their apartment, but they don't see anything.
Check it again.
Rolling uses dish soap in an effort to eliminate his DNA from Tracy's body. In her book, The Gainesville Ripper, author Mary Ryzik claims Rolling then waits and watches Tracy as she takes her last breaths.
Aim for the lungs, straight through the ribcage. Don't chase after them when you stick them. What you need to do after you stick them is just sit right down there for about 30 minutes or an hour, however long it takes.
Tracy's boyfriend, who lived in Miami, was aware of the situation in Gainesville. And when he couldn't reach Tracy, he called a local friend and asked him to check up on her.
Tracy's body is found in the hallway, and Manny's corpse is discovered in his bedroom. When detectives and forensics experts arrive, they have no doubt this is the work of the same killer.
Tracy had been raped, stabbed, and her body had been posed.
Manny showed such enormous courage, and literally, even when there was no life going to be left in him, fought to protect himself and his roommate.
Manny was a very big guy, very physically imposing, and so as the word spread through the community, this wasn't some little bitty kid that couldn't stand up for himself. It created a sense across the entire community that nowhere was safe.
3 of us slept in one room because we were definitely shaken up.
The fear was so bad on the University of Florida campus that the sale of door locks and guns actually went up during that time period.
Many students decide to withdraw their enrollment and flee the campus.
I'm leaving. My parents are coming to get me, and I'm going home.
We took people into our home out in Alachua, some miles outside of Gainesville. College students came out and stayed.
People were rooming together, and folks that lived alone were starting to accumulate together, that everybody moved kind of in groups.
I suddenly started receiving phone calls from friends that I had not talked to in many, many years, whose children were going to the university and concerned about their safety.
Investigators work to subdue rumors that are spreading.
To say that we have a suspect that's about to be arrested is very premature.
The task force has made no arrests, but they are zeroing in on one suspect.
There had been a gentleman named Ed Humphreys who had lived for a brief period of time at the Gatorwood Apartments.
What drew attention to Humphrey was he was out of control in so many settings.
Ed Humphrey is currently in police custody for assaulting his 79-year-old grandmother. Law enforcement gains a warrant to search Humphrey's apartment and take DNA samples.
Edward Humphrey had a lot of mental issues, and he had a thing for Tracy Paulus. That made him a strong, but wrong, suspect.
With police focusing on the wrong person, Danny Rolling, the Gainesville Ripper, is free to kill again.
There was a real media infatuation about this case.
Adding fuel to the media frenzy, news outlets also pick up on the similarities between the Gainesville murders and those of Jack the Ripper.
Many of Danny Rowling's murders really reflect the same type of murders that Jack the Ripper committed. He would cut off body parts, pose them.
And suddenly, we had the Gainesville Ripper.
The frenzy is taking its toll on the university and faculty.
Kids are fleeing and going back home and saying, okay, I'll start college a semester late.
First-term university president John Lombardi addresses the students during a staff meeting.
John Lombardi told students, it's clear this part of the country has a maniac on the loose.
President Lombardi encourages students to call their families and let them know they're okay. Since cell phones are not common in 1990, Lombardi opens the school fundraising phone banks so students can call their parents.
There was a determination that even they would allow students to withdraw for some period of time.
The school and the task force wanted to regain control, and Chief Clifton told the students that Gainesville would have the most police coverage of anywhere they'd ever lived before.
Then, the news breaks that the police have a suspect in custody. 18-year-old Ed Humphrey, a resident of the Gatorwood Apartments where Manny Tabota and Tracy Paulus were killed, is being questioned by police.
Ed Humphreys was thought to be the murderer of Tracy, basically because he had a crush on her.
The media immediately fixate on Ed Humphrey as the potential killer.
Many times the media is looking for a bad guy. Ed Humphreys was the epitome of this bad guy because he had some mental issues and his face was kind of jacked up. He had all these scars on his face, so he looked pretty scary.
Mr. Humphreys had a history of pretty profound mental health concerns. And so they start looking, they're looking around, they're looking for suspects, and Ed Humphreys' name just keeps coming up and coming up and coming up, either because of bizarre, aberrant behavior up into the point where it is learned that during some sort of mental health episode, he had pretty badly assaulted his grandmother. So the police capitalize on that and use that as sort of a pretext to go and check the house, and he is arrested. And initially, he is identified as being the Gainesville Ripper. And so his image goes out over newspaper media, it's shown on TV, his name is used pretty much without thought by both newspaper reporters and TV journalists.
Police still do not know that the real Gainesville Ripper is Danny Rolling, who's been hiding out in the woods near the campus.
Danny Rolling had run out of money, so he did what he always did. He robbed a bank. However, the teller tossed a dye pack into the bag, which exploded with pink paint.
Police searching the area find Danny Rolling and a fellow drug user who met Rolling just a week before.
Alachua County Sheriff's Department, stop!
Rolling flees and manages to escape into the woods while the other man is detained. As police search for Rolling, they discover his campsite and find the stolen cash covered in pink paint. Police collect Rolling's ski mask and other gear under the assumption that they're just part of his bank robbery kit. They also pick up his recorder and audio tapes, unaware that they contain the confessions of the Gainesville Ripper. Since Rolling is not yet a suspect in the Ripper murders, the tapes are ignored.
Police never played the tapes in which Danny described what he'd been up to. Instead, those tapes went directly into the evidence room.
His campsite discovered by police. Rolling panics and abruptly flees Gainesville.
Danny needed money to live and also to run, so he robbed a Winn-Dixie in Ocala, Florida.
Rolling's luck runs out after the robbery, and he is arrested on September 7th, 1990. Police do not yet realize how important this arrest is. The Gainesville Ripper's killing spree has been brought to a standstill. In the course of investigating Rolling's string of robberies, his tools found at his campsite are matched to marks left at the Gainesville murder scenes.
The screwdriver was sent off to see if it matched the pry marks at the scene. I mean, there was a lot of evidence there. There was the ski mask, and not to mention Danny's own audio recordings.
Police pull Rolling's tape recorder from storage and play the taped messages for the first time.
The impressions from the screwdriver at that camp matched pry marks on the apartment doors. What'd you find?
You're not gonna believe this. He's announcing his name on the recording. He was here all along.
This is Danny Rolling, out under the stars tonight.
Law enforcement has finally found the Gainesville Ripper. The task force reaches out to police in Danny Rolling's hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana, regarding similar crimes to the Ripper's MO. Shreveport police noticed similarities between a triple murder that occurred locally in 1989 and the recent Ripper killings. Much like Ed Humphrey in Gainesville, the authorities in Shreveport have focused on the wrong suspect, a man named Hal Carter.
Hal Carter was Julie Grissom's ex-boyfriend from Shreveport, Louisiana. And when Danny killed Julie and her family, Hal became a target for authorities.
I dated Julie for over a year, and I became the target of lead detectives in the case after their murders.
Although Carter was never arrested or charged for the murders, the suspicion was enough to upend his life in Shreveport.
I had to leave Shreveport because I lost my law practice. I was receiving death threats just because detectives in the Grissom homicide investigation concluded that I was the killer and just pursued me. Even after they learned and had facts that I was in Atlanta, Georgia during the time of the murders.
Julie had been raped, murdered, and her body was put on display, just like the girls from Gainesville. The killer also used cleaning fluid on Julie's body in an attempt to destroy the DNA evidence.
The similarities in the cases cannot be ignored. Shreveport police share their information with the Florida task force. With this new connection in mind, the task force re-examines the evidence.
In 1990, DNA testing was still in its infancy, but investigators had linked the semen found at all 3 crime scenes to one person, Danny Rolling. Because he was a habitual offender, Danny was already serving a life sentence for the bank robberies. And then, in November of 1991, he was indicted for all 5 murders in Gainesville.
Until now, the lead suspect has been 18-year-old Edward Humphrey. Through DNA testing, Humphrey is finally ruled out as a suspect.
I'm very, very happy to be free from prison today.
Around the same time, the true identity of the Gainesville Ripper is revealed through audio tapes found at his campsite.
This is Danny Rolling, out under the stars tonight.
In November 1991, Danny Rolling is indicted for the murders in Gainesville. He is already serving a life sentence for his string of robberies, but now faces the death penalty. As Rolling's murder trial nears, he makes a strange request.
I got a call. He wanted to talk to us. But it was the weirdest thing because he didn't want to talk to us. Bobby Lewis wanted to talk to us as the spokesman for Danny Rolling.
Danny befriended a fellow inmate named Bobby Lewis, and Bobby later contacted prosecutors. Bobby gave Rod Smith information that nobody else could know.
He would tell Bobby, and then Bobby would tell the police. And so that is how his confession was conducted.
Danny whispered in Bobby's ear, and then Bobby would repeat it.
Since Rolling confesses to all 5 murders, his trial moves to the penalty phase, where prosecutors push for a death sentence. The trial is held in 1994, almost 4 years after the killing spree.
Every newspaper was up here those days.
During the trial, jurors see graphic evidence, photos, and hear of the atrocities Rolling has committed.
One of his days of testimony, the jurors asked to leave after listening to what Danny had said that he did at certain scenes, and the jurors said they couldn't take any more that day.
In court, Rolling appears uncomfortable when viewing the photos.
Danny didn't want to face what he did. He didn't really want to face it.
Danny didn't want anyone seeing photographs of what he had done.
He was smart enough to realize that if they were able to see what he actually did to his victims, no jury would even consider anything less than the most severe penalty.
Although the killer will later deny it, a fellow inmate claims Rolling stated his motive for murder was to become a superstar, similar to Ted Bundy. He also claims he was possessed by a demon that compelled him to kill.
I know this will sound surprising, but he was, in his own mind, an intensely religious person. And those days when Danny did these horrible things here and in Shreveport and elsewhere, Danny literally believed that at times the devil made him do these things. And so Danny would have these characters. He called himself Enad, or he would call himself Gemini, which really, Enad is Danny backwards, and Gemini was from a movie he watched.
When you see interviews with Danny Rolling, he seems pretty reserved, but he was said to have this Jekyll and Hyde personality. And of course that matches the duality of the serial killer, but I feel with Danny Rolling there was this rage. So, you know, he might have had this bipolar rage where normally you'd see him as a calm person, but when his rage did come out, you would be dead.
I personally think that a lot of the rage that Danny Rolling exhibited in these murders was really derived from his rage against his father. I personally think Danny Rolling, serial killer, was not born, he was made. He was made through years of abuse, and had he not suffered those years of abuse, I believe that he probably would never have been a serial killer.
During the trial, Rolling's ex-wife, O'Mather Loomis, is brought in to testify. Her physical appearance might shed light on Rolling's choice of victims.
It does appear that an element of it may have been his former wife because of the similarity in appearance between the female victims and his former wife. All of the ladies had a similar look. They were petite and brunette, and that is a description of Danny Rolling's former wife. It's hard to know whether his former wife was his ultimate motive for these killings. I don't know that, but certainly it's something that was possibly part of his motive.
His ex-wife casts doubt on Rolling's claim of demonic possession.
Danny or anybody in his family talk about demons or being visited by demons or anything like that?
I never did.
But at least one person has a different view of Danny Rolling.
During the trial, he made contact, or a woman made contact with him, and they instantly and immediately fell in love and were super well bonded. And so at the time of his conviction, he asked to address the court, and instead of speaking to the court, he sang a love song that he had written to her.
I recall the day I first saw you. I reached out to say I love you.
The music that Danny Rolling wrote was pretty bad. It wasn't even, anything, remotely, of quality.
On April 20th, 1994, Danny Rolling is sentenced to death by lethal injection. Rolling is held on death row for 12 years in Florida State Prison. Before the execution, Hal Carter, the man suspected in Rolling's 1989 murders in Shreveport, writes to Danny in jail.
I learned that Danny Rolling was about to be executed in 30 days, and I wrote him and asked him to confess to the Grissom murders. He wrote me back. I was surprised. And at the conclusion of the letter, he said, "You will be vindicated." So I took that as assurance from him that he was going to do what I asked him to do in my letter to him, that, among other things, ask him to confess to the Grissom murders.
Shortly before he is executed, Danny Rolling finally admits to killing the Grissoms in a handwritten and signed confession. In it, he states, quote, "I and I alone am guilty."
It was literally the day of his execution, that was literally 17 years after the Grissom murders, that he wrote that confession that I basically was able to orchestrate through help with his pastor, through his prison chaplain, through his appeal attorney. They all worked with me and helped me to ultimately get that confession from Danny Rolling, in which he said Hal Carter is 100% innocent of these murders. He really did have some form of a split, as people might call it, split or dual personality.
On October 25th, 2006, Danny Rolling is executed for the Gainesville murders. Those affected by Rolling's senseless murders try to move on with their lives. Ed Humphrey, once suspected of being the Gainesville Ripper, goes on to graduate from college in 2000. Hal Carter, falsely accused of the Grissom murders, is now a motivational speaker and is working on a book and movie about his ordeal. Families of the 5 victims petition to have the evidence and crime scene photos from the case sealed.
In 2008, police gave the media one last time to look at the evidence before they destroyed it.
These were great kids with great futures. Think about it. Today, without Danny Rolling, they would have kids probably about the age going to this university. They would have been alumni. They would have been legacies.
In Gainesville, there's a large wall along 34th Street, which is famous for its graffiti. It is also frequently painted over, but one section, a memorial to the 5 students who fell victim to Danny Rolling, is left untouched.
And they change and paint on it all day long. But remember Sonia and Tracy, Krista, Christina, Manny, still there. That same heart that's been there all these many years.